But one of the key things that came out of the survey was when we look at income, and the median range across all of the respondents was in the area of $50,000 to $75,000 a year. IPBC certifies their members with a designation called the Certified Professional Bookkeeper, CPB. And a sole practitioner member with a CPB earns on average 14% more than a non-member without a designation. 14% more.
Wow.
Now, a bookkeeping firm with IPBC members, and that would be with staff, earns an average of 22% more annually than a non-IPBC member firm.
You're listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with your host, Michael Palmer. Listen each week as inspiring guests share their secrets of success to help you increase your confidence, work smarter, and build a business you love. This episode of The Successful Bookkeeper is brought to you by PureBookkeeping.com, the proven system to grow your bookkeeping business.
Welcome back to the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. I am your host, Michael Palmer, and today's guest is considered Canada's leading analyst in the area of accounting technology. Alan Salmon has been in the industry for over 27 years, working in general business, management systems, education, and really brings his experience of journalism to the industry. As the managing director of K2E, he is responsible for the Canadian operations of this international consulting group, which provides professional development and technology education for accountants across Canada and the United States. He really is considered a pillar in the bookkeeping community here in Canada, but as well internationally. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Good morning, Michael. I'm delighted to be here with you.
You know, Alan, I'd be surprised if the listeners didn't already know you or have already heard of you or heard you speak. But for those that don't, can you share how you became one of the leading thought leaders in the accounting professional space?
That's an interesting question, Michael. And my life has been full of challenges that when I accepted them, I made a course change. I'm going to take you back to early 1979, when at that time I was director of continuing education at George Brown College. And I was in my office one evening. It was 5:30 and the phone rang, and this young woman said, "Alan, you don't know me, but I'm the director of PD for CJ Ontario, and we're looking for someone that can present a course on public speaking to our members because it's now a requirement. Do you know of anybody?" And I said, "Sure, that's something that I do in my spare time." So out of that came about 2 years of doing sessions with the CGAs. And then that young lady called me back and said, "We're getting bombarded by vendors who want to explain our technology, meaning our computer technologies, to our members. And we're afraid that that will become a sales pitch as opposed to an education. What can you do for us?" So I sat down very quickly and said, okay, they need to know a little bit about VisiCalc. Most of your listeners will be too young to remember that. And they need to know a little bit about word processing. And they need to learn about database. Put together a one-day technology course. And from there, I was into the technology game.
Wow.
Moving on, again, a good friend of mine started the Bottom Line newspaper. That would be Gundy Jeffrey. Because at that time, the three designations really weren't talking to each other. And Gundy thought there was a need for news that crossed the boundaries. And I was invited to be one of the first columnists for it. And I wrote for the Bottom Line for 22 years. And that got me into the research. And out of that came about 13 books, mostly on comparisons. So comparing one piece of software to the other. And then in 1999, I got involved with my K2 partners in the U.S. and got heavily into the teaching. So there, in a nutshell, is taking advantage of opportunities, Michael.
Yeah, and I can hear inside of that, over 27 years, really just grabbing whatever opportunity was in front of you and really exploring it. You are an adventurer. It really comes through. I know I've heard you speak, and you've talked about the travel that you've traveled all over the world, but I can now, just listening to you now, it's that sense of adventure and curiosity that I think has enabled you to really explore and then bring that learning back to the people who can use it and benefit from it, which is very interesting. Tell me a little bit about this travel, and you've traveled all over the world. How has your international travel impacted your view of the industry and the work you do?
Well, I'm going to come at you on that one from a different point of view.
Please do.
Yesterday was the 19th anniversary of a blind date that I had with a brunette, and things went well. So in 2000, I proposed to her, and she turned me down. Of course, not many people propose by email.
Oh, boy.
So 6 months later, I had to take her to Maui and do it right. And out of that came a marriage that has been really wonderful. And part of the things that Nancy and I did very early on was try to do what most people do poorly, and that is strike a life-work balance. And in my business at that time, and still, April was a down month for obvious reasons. So we decided to take April off and travel the world. And one of my dreams was to fly around the world. Nancy had no interest in that. So in 2003, we visited South America for 2.5 weeks. And Nancy flew home, and I flew around the world. And while I was doing it, I was checking out sites for future long-term visits. And we continued that process right until I had my operation in 2012. So out of that came 9 trips around the world and some amazing adventures in Europe, in South Africa, in Egypt, in China, in Australia, and so on. So that was a case of really balancing life work, and I think we did it very well.
By the sounds of it, you did. 9 times around the world. That's extraordinary. So you're well-traveled. You've really carved a name for yourself in the industry and deepened your knowledge across technology and general business and all forms of accounting profession, really, from bookkeeping right up to CAs, and you're well respected in the industry. What's on your plate now? I mean, it's like I'm curious what opportunity you're sinking your teeth into now.
Well, I should have retired 15 years ago, but here's another interesting thing, Michael. In the last 20 years, I don't think I have ever woken up in the morning and said, I don't want to do any work today. And that has been a great source. So I'm continuing to change. And 15 years after I should have retired, I have 2 new ventures, one that is now solid and one I will be launching in the next couple of months. And I'm sorry I can't talk about it. But my strength is Excel in terms of actual technology. And I think I've got as good a handle on Excel as anyone in the industry. So we have a wonderful newsletter that goes out to over 10,000 bookkeepers and accountants. And as you know, with any newsletter subscription list, one of the tactics is, how do you monetize that? So I had a brilliant insight a couple of years ago and said, well, why don't I sell Excel webinars? And I quickly got shot down by my friends who said, why would I buy your Excel webinar when I can get it for free on the web? Back to the drawing board. So what we launched last October was a 1 hour, noon hour Eastern time mini webinar where for 25 minutes I do what I call Excel magic. And for the other 25 minutes, we introduce a product or a service that would be useful to bookkeepers and accountants. And that has gone over like gangbusters. We currently have about 700 registered for each of those webinars, and we're sold out to the end of the year.
Incredible.
So there's the answer to your question.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. And it's just very entrepreneurial in terms of, whilst you really understand that there's information and there's providing information, but you've also looked at it from how to make a business of it and actually make it valuable to your businesses, which is, I mean, I love the format. I think it's fantastic. Before we started this, I guess we could call it the pre-conversation to this interview, we started talking about the major survey that you did for the IPBC, the Institute of Professional Bookkeepers here in Canada, and some really interesting metrics that came out of that. And I'd love to, I was really intrigued with what you had said, and I'd love our listeners to hear it as well. Can we talk about that?
We certainly can. So let's deal with who the bookkeepers are. 76 are self-employed. The remainder are working in industry, not-for-profits, and so on. Not surprising, 76% are women. But here's an interesting metric. Bookkeeping is an aging population. 78% of the respondents are over the age of 45. 77% have a mature practice. They've been in business for more than 6 years. And the key, and it ties in with the move to the cloud, 56% of them spend less than 25% of their time at a client's office.
Wow.
So there's a significant shift from on-site services to off-site. And 80% of them, not surprisingly, run a home-based business.
Wow. And when you did this survey, this was a massive survey, and I think you mentioned it was 200. How many pages was it?
Well, the report was 200 pages. There were 1,600 responses, which gave it a high credibility when you look at survey results.
Oh, yeah. Incredible. And so when you got all the data back and you've chewed through it, what did it tell you that from a bookkeeper that's listening right now, what should they be thinking about and putting their attention on based on your takeaways?
Well, I've got to do a disclaimer here, Michael. As you may know, I am a director of IPBC. But one of the key things that came out of the survey was when we look at income, and the median range across all of the respondents was in the area of $50,000 to $75,000 a year. IPBC certifies their members with a designation called the Certified Professional Bookkeeper, CPB. And a sole practitioner member with a CPB earns on average 14% more than a non-member without a designation. 14% more.
Wow.
Now, a bookkeeping firm with IPBC members, and that would be with staff, earns an average of 22% more annually than a non-IPBC member firm.
Phenomenal. Well, I don't have to do any disclaimers. I am not a board member, and I will say we absolutely love the IPBC and Bookkeeper Association. I mean, IPBC isn't in every country, and we have listeners all over the world. But listener, if you are not a part of an association, and in Canada, really the number one association, I mean, you don't have to look very far. It is the IPBC. It's an incredible organization. You don't have to look very far. If you're not in an association, if you don't belong to an association, I mean, if those numbers are not a glaring come over here sign, open for business sign, you're going to love the business sign, then you're crazy. And so, I mean, I've seen it. I've been to now, I think last year, I've been to the annual conference. They're excellent. And I think, Alan, my take on it is the reason why they make more. And these are big numbers, right? 14% more as an individual, 22% more income as a business. And I think the reason is that they're surrounding themselves with people who are really serious about their success.
And I would agree with you on all of those statements, Michael.
Yeah. Big part of this podcast is about educating and inspiring bookkeepers to do the great work that they do. And this is part of that education. And there's no, I don't hold anything back when it comes to associations. In my belief, you have to belong to your industry, whether you're a plumber, whether you're an electrician. If you are in business, you need to be with your association, because your association is what brings you education and what brings you confidence. It's what brings you like-mindedness. And it's the ones that belong to those associations that are more successful. So, it's a bit of a soapbox I sometimes get up onto, but I don't mind doing it, especially the fact that you're on the show today and heavily involved. You haven't always been on the board, though, Alan, right? Because I know you got back on the board recently.
No.
You've done a lot of work for that organization over the last several years as well.
I came on the board as an advisor 5 years ago or 4 years ago, and was elected to the board 3 years ago and reelected last year. But I've been working with bookkeepers for 25 years, and the other stuff that I've been doing, for example, with Sage and with Intuit. But let me again point you to something that I'm working on right now that ties in exactly with what you're doing. And that is, I'm developing a keynote that I will deliver 3 times, and it's called Learning is a Lifetime Activity. And I'm going to weave into that all the ways and means that I have learned, taught myself technology, etc., over the last 27 years. And I think that will prove interesting.
I think so. And it's really apropos with the conversation we've had and your history. I mean, learning is a lifetime adventure. Say the title again. Learning is...
I haven't got it locked in. I think it's going to be Learning is a Never-Ending Road or Destination.
Yes.
I'm playing with that now.
I like it. And I mean, based on this conversation so far, you're definitely equipped to deliver that. And so let's go in that direction a little bit. People are busy. They're time strapped. We constantly hear about people saying we don't have enough time. We're pulling our hair out over here. How can the listeners get their mind around what it is they need to do to take in more information and become a lifetime learner like yourself?
Well, I'm going to go at it from 2 different perspectives, Michael. The first thing is, before I crash every night, in my mind, and I got to admit that I don't write it down, I pick out the 3 things or the 4 things that I absolutely have to do tomorrow. And of course, that's an ongoing thing. And I make it a point, very rarely do I not do those things.
And that, you said you did that every night before you go to bed.
Yep, that's my project plan.
Okay.
And then Nancy and I work out 5 years. We have our 5-year set of goals, and they're monetized, so we've got a 5-year budget. We can pretty well know what our income will be. And we're starting to cut back a little bit on some of the expenses that we really don't need to apply. So there's 2 answers from the team of Alan and Nancy.
Yeah, I love it. Think about what the 3 to 4 things you need to do, that must do to tomorrow, and then have your 5-year plan clear and, and know where you're headed. And certainly you're busy, you travel a lot, you do a lot of keynotes all over the world. And so you make learning a priority, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. The other thing that I'm about to do is I'm going to research the way people learn. I started out I wrote a dozen of my friends a couple of weeks ago, and I said, what's your favorite method of learning? Blogs, videos, et cetera, et cetera. And I got a whole bunch of different responses, and it would be impossible to categorize them. So sometime in the next 3 weeks, I'm going to send out a survey that asks more specific questions. Do you read newspapers? Do you read podcasts? Listen to podcasts. Do you have a favorite blog? Do you have a favorite video? And that will be part of my keynotes, and I will be publishing those results.
Beautiful. I love it. So in terms of technology, you're a wizard at Excel. Is there technology right now that you recommend bookkeepers spend time learning about?
Absolutely, Michael. The obvious first one is I think they should focus on one accounting solution and really learn it well, in fact, get certified on it. So at the bookkeeping level, I'm not deliberately leaving people out, you've got QuickBooks Desktop, QuickBooks Online, you've got Sage 50, you've got Sage 1, you've got Xero, and maybe a little bit of Cashew. So get really good at that. The second piece of technology is a Microsoft product, and understand I don't get paid for trying to sell software, which I'm not trying to do. But Microsoft now has an online service called Office 365. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of partners, every bookkeeper and accountant should be on Office 365. Why? For one thing, you get the full up-to-date desktop versions, and notice I said desktop. These are not in the cloud. And for every monthly license, and I think I'm paying $20 a month for mine, I get 5 actual copies of Excel. So with $20 a month, I'm running Excel on 2 laptops, my Microsoft Surface, my iPad, and my smartphone. What would it cost you to buy 5 licenses? But in addition, there is a little relatively unknown piece of Office 365 called SharePoint. And very, very few people either understand it or even know what it's there for. And I qualify SharePoint as being an online library. So let me give you an example of how we use it in K2. 5 years ago, and we run about 29 different courses, all of which have manuals that run from 100 to 200 pages. Someone, in many cases me, would edit the manual. And then I would send copies to 3 or 4 people in our firm, and they would turn on comments, send it back to me. And before long, we were suffering for what I call versionitis. Which version is the correct one? So now with SharePoint, we have a folder up there for manuals. Everybody has access to it. I go up and I make the change, and everybody instantly has access to it. So that's one asset of SharePoint.
That's brilliant.
The second is I can set up folders, and there's good controls and security on SharePoint. So if you were a client of mine, Michael, I would set up a folder for you and all of the key documents, your tax forms, your financial statements, any notes, any Excel that I do for you would be in the Michael folder. And the only person that would have access to it would be me and you. Now, I know a lot of people out there are paying a fair amount of money for that ability to host stuff in the sky. For my $20 a month, I don't need any other software. Now, when it comes to a third one, I've been wrestling with that ever since you sent me my Q notes. And I would say that the third piece that everyone should have is something to manage their time. Not the bill time, because I'm a huge fan of not billing by the hour, but value billing. But you need to manage your time. And there's a lot of different ways of doing that. There's some neat apps for doing that within QuickBooks Online. There's things like Client Track, TPS software, Vocom, and so on that get into more advanced time tracking and project planning. So I guess that's my 3 things that if I was going into bookkeeping or accountant, heaven forbid, I would want to have.
That's great. It's interesting, the Microsoft conversation, and just the way that I do the same thing, the licensing, and a couple of extra things to add to that. I mean, just the sheer updates, and always having the most, like, you're paying that licensing fee monthly, but you're getting the very best, all the updates. You never have to worry about, are you using the most up-to-date versions of what you're using. Now, the SharePoint's an interesting one, and I want to look into that myself. So I think that's a bit of a value bomb that I'm going to make sure we highlight, people listen to, and think about, because for $20 a month, and you're probably using one of the more advanced packages, people can start for less than that and dip their toe in the pool if they're not totally confident. The other thing is you can quit anytime, right? It's beautiful. Software as a service. Licensing it that way is brilliant for small business. I just love it.
Yeah, let me do an add-on there since you brought that up. Yes, you can do a cancel at any time. Understand that your data, and I'm now talking specifically about Excel data, if I create a spreadsheet, it is saved not only on my device, in this case my laptop, but it's also saved in the cloud on a piece of the Office 365 technology called OneDrive. So if there's a problem, I've got it in the cloud. And if I cancel, I've still got all of my data downstream. And again, an interesting side, Michael, if you are running Outlook, which we all run, and you're using the desktop version of Outlook, and you have a hard drive crash, you have lost all of your email unless you're backing up your PSD file.
That's
now,
right.
Office 365 Outlook comes with what's called Exchange. And Exchange means that your Outlook is not only on your desktop, but it's also in the cloud. So I tend to do dumb things. So twice in the last 3 years, I deleted my inbox.
Oh, boy.
But guess what? It's still there in the cloud version. It took me about 5 minutes, and I'm back in business.
Brilliant.
So there's another advantage of Office 365.
Yeah. In this day and age, there's just no way, whether you're a Mac user, PC user, if you're not using Microsoft Suite, it's crazy. And for the cost, it's a no-brainer. I think that's a great piece of advice. I do want to ask a couple more questions, and I know we're getting a little long on time, but you've worked with bookkeepers, accountants, all over the place. And one of the things that we like to talk about is building relationships with accountants, bookkeepers, in terms of having strong relationships. What would you say, give your best advice around bookkeepers working with accountants?
Well, number one, let's come at it from 2 points of view. I'm a practicing bookkeeper with a practice, and I'm doing books for clients who also have accountants. Well, the first step there is obviously to talk to the accounting partner and say, are there any other clients that you'd like me to do the books for? Because bookkeeping doesn't generate a lot of profit for accountants. So go to the source and ask. Now, if I was just starting out, and even if I wasn't just starting out, I would very quickly do a Google search and build a database of all the accountants in my area. And then I would knock on doors. That could be digitally, by the way, as opposed to physically.
Yes, absolutely.
Now, when it comes to upgrading services or selling value-add services, which both accountants and bookkeepers are starting to do now, the bookkeeper has the ground floor on that, much to the dismay of some accountants, because they're dealing with the clients all the time. The bookkeeper probably only deals with the client maybe quarterly or maybe annually, and in addition, maybe during tax season. So the really smart bookkeepers in this world, and I could name a couple. I'm going to name just one. Diane Mueller, the chair of IPBC, has a program where she sends out every Monday morning a cash flow for all of her clients. Here's what you need to have in the bank this week. And then she has a monthly online meeting for her clients to discuss issues. And she doesn't talk a lot, she listens. And if you listen carefully, you're going to pick up some needs. How do I do this? How do I do that? And out of that will come services and particularly training, Michael.
That's another value bomb, Alan. A big one. Big value bomb. Absolutely love that approach. Being in front of your clients and hearing their problems. I mean, that's every salesperson's dream, to just know what's going on inside of the mind of an entrepreneur. And they're hard people to get in front of. Typically, I mean, banks and investment companies, their mouth waters at being able to get in touch with the type of people, bookkeepers, yourself, and those that are listening have direct access to, because you are helping them keep more of their money in their bank. And so the way Diane's doing it is brilliant, and she's actually going to be a guest on our podcast in the next couple of weeks, which I'm excited. This will be a great lead-in that we can have a conversation with her about. So there you have it, listeners. I mean, that there is just an excellent piece of advice around working with accountants and what you can do to grow your business through working with both accountants and as well just being the lead person. You're in front of them. Grow your practice through just being in front of your clients. I love that. Now, Alan, before we end, you've got lots of stuff. You've mentioned a few things. Let's take a bit of time here to just lay out some resources that you have available that you'd love for our listeners to go and take advantage of. You mentioned an email list. What do you got on?
Well, I'm now in marketing mode, Michael, so I'll say that up front. Let me focus on three things. The first is what we call the Accounting Technology Seminar Series. And this is a one-day seminar that we run in 15 cities from coast to coast. And would you believe this is the 25th anniversary for it? It runs every October. And it's just one day chock full of what's new in all of the technologies, tax, accounting, you name it. They can get information about that on the webpage for www.k2e.ca. And we'll start, starting the 1st of May, we'll be marketing it. Second is the newsletter. That's a monthly newsletter that contains 3 Excel tips and 1 Word tip. And the way you get on the list for that, if you're not on the list, is again go to the homepage of www.k2e.ca and sign up for it. And the third thing is the mini webinars, which are free. And again, you go to the website. So there, in a nutshell, Michael, is where they can get more information. And as a teaser, one of the things that I will do if people write me at Alan, A-L-A-N, at K2E.ca, is I will send them 250 Excel tips.
Boom.
And my favorite tip is Control S. Do you know why?
Tell us.
Because that's the save command, and I do that a lot. No doubt about it. Oh, even with autosave these days, so never enough times. Save it never enough times. Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and I can tell right now this is going to be another one of those great episodes. Tons of value bombs that you gave today. And for the listeners, if you're on your smartphone, just tap on the little right up there. There'll be a link that will take you right to all of the links Alan's just mentioned. And as well, we'll have some notes on this episode for you to gather. But if you're not on Alan's list and getting his information, I mean, you're crazy for the amount of time he's going to be able to save you and valuable information that he's going to be able to give you over his 27 years of doing this. It's an absolute no-brainer. And we're just so grateful that you were able to be on our show. It was a privilege.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps another episode of the Successful Bookkeeper podcast. To learn more about today's guest and what a great guest he's been, and to get access to all sorts of valuable free business building resources, you can go to thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to The Successful Bookkeeper with Michael Palmer. For more information and to download the resources mentioned in this episode, please visit us at thesuccessfulbookkeeper.com. Thank you for listening.